Hey everyone, Internet Vicious Book Reader here. Today I want to talk about Children of Dune by Frank Herbert. Children of Dune is the third book of the original Dune series. In the first two books, we followed the rise and fall of Paul Atreides as Lisan al-Gaib in the planet of Arrakis, the sole source of the galaxy's spice melons. We know that through Paul's plan, the House of Atreides lives on in Arrakis and maybe even beyond because he gave his Kwisatz Haderach seeds to the Bene Gesserit too. He tried to escape from being perceived as a god in Arrakis despite using his prescience to take over the world, while the rest of the world see him for just another ruler, which historically only led to bad things. And to make matters worse for everyone on the planet, the Tleilaku now know how to fully resurrect the dead because their experiment with Duncan is successful in bringing Paul's dead bodyguard to life. And with that story set as the background, we open the third book with a much older Stilgar guarding Paul's children Leto and Ganima, the twin that Chani gave birth with her life. Stilgar has changed since we first met him. He has lost sight of Dune since the planet has changed so much. It is now closer to what other people call it, Arrakis instead of Dune. It's no longer the dry desert planet he knew, and there's even a case of drowning, a word that never entered Freeman vocabulary his entire life. After Paul's death, Jessica, who has exiled herself to Caladan, returned to Arrakis to meet her daughter and grandchildren. All three of them never experienced childhood since they're all born with memories of their ancestors because of the combination of the water of life that both Jessica and Paul drink and survive, and then add that with the addiction to the melons. Stilgar remembered that the Bene Gesserit called Alia an abomination, and the same should be said about the twins from Paul since they have the same ability as Paul Muad'Dib and Alia. And for a brief moment, Stilgar talked about killing the twins, ending all the complicated matter of statecraft and return back to being a desert freeman. But he decided to let things flow and see where it will take them. The twins woke up, and after the child Leto flirted with Stilgar's wife during breakfast, they went to meet with their grandmother Jessica. We don't know where her loyalty is right now. In the first book, she's the one that caused Paul to become the Kwisatz Haderach, which saved the House of Atreides from extinction from the Coriolis Emperor plan, and enables Paul's rise to become the new Galaxy Emperor. But in the second book, she self-imposed herself to Caladan, the original Atreides home planet, and basically abandoned her two children for the entirety of the second book. There's even rumors that she has since turned back into a Bene Gesserit since she has given her previous position as the Freeman Divine Mother to her daughter Alia. So we have no idea why she returned to Arrakis now of all time after Paul's death. Meanwhile, the Corino family also starts to regain their power. While Saddam Corino IV has been dethroned by Paul, using his future vision to basically cheat code his way into power. Now with Paul's gone, the Corino family can finally regain their power back if they wanted to try, which they seem to be. Now back to Arrakis, Jessica once again returned to the planet where she lost her husband, and seeing Alia, she confirmed that her daughter has fallen into abomination, which is when an ego of an ancestor has taken over the body of the person who are affected by the water of life. We just don't know who she become yet for now. Then with a quick action, she made a plan to make people remember the Freeman way to kneel to the Divine Mother with a gesture, and quickly killed or captured the people who hesitated or won't kneel, which Stilgar followed with helping capturing them because he is an old head after all. The book way of showing us who the antagonist of the story is, without actually telling us who the enemy is genius. Even now, decades after the book was written, we still don't know who Alia is, but whoever she is, she's the main antagonist of the third book. Poor Duncan though, it seems life just kept getting worse for him after that. Meanwhile, while Jessica and Alia is having their battle of wits, Leto and Kenny that Alia is trying to separate from Jessica is starting to figure out that as twins, they started to grow further apart. Leto has developed Paul's prescient vision, and it shows him that he might need to go to Jagurutu, a place that is considered taboo for the Freeman and where a mysterious figure known as the Preacher is, a blind figure that might just be their missing father, Paul Muad'Dib. At the same time, Jessica and Gurney Halleck that came with her also got some information about Jagurutu from the people they've captured earlier, so Jessica sent Halleck to Jagurutu following that information. There's an ongoing rumor that the Preacher is Muad'Dib that has gone to the desert because no one has seen his body when he left to walk the desert blind. He has no eye on his socket, wear all Dune equipment unlike the modern one, and he brought with him a guide to help him walk, a boy named Asan Tarik. The two of them were on a city on Arrakis when the people has changed compared to the first book, Watersoft the book called them, because now there's an abundance of water and they have no need for the steel suit and the dry skin. There was an event in the city plaza where Sand Dancer was performing there, and one of them had a revelation that the place will once again be covered in sand. Hearing this, the people of the city laughed at them, and that's when we got the quote from the book when the preacher yelled at them. Blasphemers and idolaters, all of you. The religion of Muad'Dib is not Muad'Dib. He spurned it as he spurns you. Sand will cover this place. Sand will cover you. Because of what he said and how he said it and how he looked, many among the city thought he is either Muad'Dib himself or a prophet that carried his message. Paul's attempt at making Muad'Dib into a non-religion has yet to succeed. Here, the book also made it much more clearer that the religion in Dune is planted by the Bene Gesserit, so they can plant their own Kwisatz Haderach and use the free man for their own benefit. If not because of Paul, who become a Kwisatz Haderach that is not in their control, things would have been very different for Arrakis. And because this is a space political drama, we go to Seleucia Secundus, the planet for the retired member of the House of Corino, the previous emperor. Princess Wencesia, Emperor Shaddam's daughter and Irulan's sister, commanded one of her warriors, Tieganik, to go to Arrakis and embrace the Muad'Dib religion to help convert her own son into the religion too. Also, they can learn more about the Atreides family in order to kill the Atreides twin. Back in Arrakis, Jessica finally managed to meet Ganida, her granddaughter. The twin is already aware that Alia has become an abomination. In a way, Alia is a victim to this situation. Because her mother drinks the divine water when she was pregnant, she became weaker to the abomination influence since she hasn't fully formed her own self yet. Then Jessica left both Paul and Alia to another planet. Then Paul leaves so he can do whatever it is he's doing while he's blind, forcing Alia into the solitary position of ruler of the entire galaxy. Jessica, fully aware that she took a big responsibility in causing Alia to become an abomination, thought internally that she will separate Gani from her brother, so at least she's safe from the influence and didn't become an abomination. But who is Alia's abomination? Well, since she was but a baby, there are uncountable voices that is trying to influence her so they can take control of her. She has somehow managed to shove away these voices to the fringe of her psyche, but when she was forced to take the leadership role in Arrakis in the absence of Jessica and Paul, she took a lot of the Spice Melons hoping for a prescient vision to help guide her, which unfortunately backfired and caused the voices to intensify instead. She heard voices of unfamiliar names, the Greek king Agamemnon, the Roman poet Ovid, but one voice in particular managed to break her slowly but surely with the help of the pressure of being the leader of the space empire. It's the voice of Paul's grandfather and Jessica's father, Baron Harkonnen, the guy she killed with her own hand. There's a lot of what feels like the understanding of mental health back then, including parts that keep saying that woman is more susceptible to being controlled by voices of the past, which doesn't make much sense narratively since Kwisatz Haderach is dangerous because they're unstable male that can access the voices of the past and future. But getting back to the story, Gani and Leto decided to seek counsel from the voices on how to not get possessed to avoid being an abomination. Together Leto channeled Paul and Gani channeled Chani, which is how they found out for sure that Paul is in Jacurutu. There was an incident where Chani refused to leave Gani's body and wanted to perform some Alabama with the Paul inside Leto, which thankfully only goes to the level of Luke and Leia, but if they were children with adult mind. But both of them managed to regain their bodies, thankfully. They contemplated about how to avoid being taken by the Bene Gesserit and considered the British royal family method of making their family tree into a racetrack, but dismiss it soon since it's not the way of the Golden Path, the path that Paul has seen and laid that is still very obnoxiously hidden from us. We then go to Farad, the grandson of the previous emperor, where he is visited by the preacher, which is definitely Paul. The book is not exactly subtle about saying that the guy is definitely Paul Atreides. He helped interpret Farad's dream. We also have a short conversation between Jessica and Leto, showing what kind of person Leto is when he asks Jessica to accept being kidnapped by Alia when the time comes. After their conversation is done, the preacher then fast travel back to Arrakis on a public meeting with Alia and Irulan, where they have no idea what to do with the preacher when Irulan surprisingly notice and voice out their dependency on Priscian have robbed them of their ability to make decisions. What of the major theme of Dune? Destiny versus free will, fighting against what is set in stone. Then finally it's time for the preacher to talk. He sent messages to 4 people, Alia, Stilgar, Irulan, and Duncan Idaho. Then to my surprise, he started educating people about the danger of manifest destiny, one of America's white supremacy beliefs that become their self-justification to get rid of the native in order to stole their land, another of Dune world building that is inspired by grounded reality. Dune's imagination of a future in space and where it took place is amazing, but how much it is really grounded on reality is often underappreciated because of how alien other aspect of the story is, which I think is unfortunate. Then Stilgar and Leto went on a journey where they had a long conversation. They have a conversation about the danger of dependency on prescience, on seeing the future and be locked by it. Leto helps Stilgar learn from the long history that comes from the voices and memories of his ancestor. That Stilgar she has to accept change to let go of old ways. It is a thing that is also based on our world where the old gods of the old ways still cling on them even when the world has changed so much and there are no places for these old ways and old tradition that even in the past is not even that good of a thing to do. For example, the Manifest Destiny the preacher mentioned previously that doesn't even have any basis on goodwill, just greed that benefit only the few. And in the world of Dune by the time of our story, the whole system that the Bene Gesserit has built, including the Prescient dependency and all the religion belief, including Kwisatz Haderach and Lisan al-Gaib, all will have to be dismantled, which is a difficult thing to do since most people doesn't do well in actually learning from history. The third book is definitely the best writing that the book series has done. The first one doesn't have that good of character writing with most people being very surface only. Then the second one feels rushed with more time skip than even the first one, that it almost felt like you're reading printed Wikipedia. Well, there are some of those flaws still, but in here it's much cleaner. There are still some major flaws if you have a good memory or you read the book back to back like I do. Jessica just conveniently forgetting all the characters I've learned from the first movie is crazy. Her decision to leave at the second book already felt out of character that has learned so much in the first book, but her decision to return to the sisterhood makes even less sense. It's just the plot needed her to do so, so she did, which is a shame because it shows a willingness to change a character without any warning in order to move the plot, which for a long series is a bad habit to have because it will lessen the impact the character will have in the story. It's a very DC Marvel comic storytelling which I hope didn't make another appearance in later books. We are not even halfway through the book and so far, these are mostly character introduction and world building including introducing the premise of the story, but it's done in a much better pace than the first and second book. It doesn't feel rushed, which shows the confidence of the writer in their story, but it also didn't feel stressed out, which showed the skill backing those confidence. It is only after all the setup that we finally get all the action that has been set up so far. Jessica assassination attempt, Leto and Gunny assassination attempt, the separation of each characters until finally each of them have to move separately. Duncan will kidnap Jessica to Salusa Secundus to meet Farad'n Corino, where Jessica will try to marry Ganima to him. Meanwhile, Leto and Gunny for the first time will be separated because of the attack from Farad'n's father. They know the separation won't just be temporary since from now on, they will be two separate individuals. Gunny will move back to Alia to attack from the inside, while Leto will go to the Freeman to receive their training. Until all the characters move back for an amazing climatic conclusion back in Arrakis. The other graphs on English is also another level here. The dialogue and monologue are much better. I wouldn't be surprised if many favorite quotes from Dune came from this book, from at least the 3 books I've read so far. Dune also has always been a story that have a deep philosophical theme guiding its story, but this book took it to another level. Besides the Manifest Destiny and a look into its destroying nature that the author took from white supremacy, the book also quoted many philosophers like Nietzsche, even mentioning Amor Fati at one point, calling it the ultimate self-examination. The preacher or Paul Atreides even mentioned Thomas Aquinas, an Italian priest and philosopher, to speak against religion. Also, the author do have a habit of adding new detail to anything. For example, only in this first book, it was mentioned that the Bene Gesserit have a way to remain youthful, which was never mentioned before I think, and that's also annoying since that means the skill of any character or person depends on the plot, which is also another DC Marvel comic long-term storytelling that I hope is not used too often later on. But all the characters, even Leto and Gunny that is newly introduced, are more interesting compared to even the Paul in the first book. This is still the best Dune out of the initial trilogy I think. The first one you can tell is very experimental and grasping at how to tell the story. Most of the characters feels very side characters, even Paul is not even that well fleshed out if you read the first book, while the second one is too short and the way the story is told make it feel like just a series of chronological events. It's not until this third one that you can tell the characters have distinct personalities even outside of the plot. The book also opens up further about how hopeless the world of Dune can be. All of Paul's effort at the first and second book almost feel meaningless on the grand scheme of things. Alia should have to end up how she ended as an abomination if only there was anyone on her side at the right time. Paul's option is also shown to be flawed because he didn't make the decision to be immortal like Leto, so he cannot let himself become a god in Freeman's eye. Because then once he died, many people will use his teaching and wisdom to cause atrocities. Something that all religion in the world has experienced, even Buddhism that is notorious for being the most passive. And now Leto has taken that mantle. He turned into Shai-Hulud personified, part sandworm with super strength that can live to thousands of years, and part all-knowing human worth experience from countless centuries of the past and the future. Also now there is a limit to the amount of spice because of the change that the Freeman has did to Dune, to Arrakis. But Leto at least managed to fulfill Paul's wish of dismantling Muad'Dib as a religion by replacing him. If Paul is chosen by Shai-Hulud, Leto is Shai-Hulud itself. He is an immortal hybrid of man and sandworm who now control not only the Freeman but also the Coriolis House Sardaukar by making Farad'n take the role of Irulan. Oh, he also married his sister Ganima while still making her become a political mother for Farad'n children. Yes, that's how weird the story of Dune has gotten. I don't think there will ever be a faithful adaptation to this third book. One, no child actor can capture the nuances of complex characters like Leto and Gani. Two, sure, they can make them more mature like the miniseries has done, but it lessens how alien the world of Dune is if they did those. And finally, 3. It would be so weird imagining the director trying to make children kiss if an attempt was made to adapt this book. When they say that Dune got weirder, they really mean it. That's why I recommend reading the book instead of hoping for any adaptation. The world of Dune after this book is under the thumb of an immortal, all-powerful figure. And if Dune stays true to the spirit of his story, that's not a good thing for the world of Dune. So most likely we will have to unpack those nightmares in later volumes, which I cannot wait to get into. But for now, I give this book a 4.25. What do you think? Let me know if I missed anything, so leave your thoughts in the comment below and subscribe to the channel. That's about it. See ya.